This meeting is an online live meeting with the intention of being able to kick off offline discussions. We are in the middle of doing Crowbar2 refactor. For information about that, you should visit bit.ly Crowbar2, and you will have links to a whole bunch of resources, including the ones we discuss here. During this refactor, we recognize the need to have a lot more coordination and synchronization so that the community can get included. And so every Thursday at 8 a.m. Central, we do a planning where we review our last sprint's activity, and then we coordinate resources for the coming sprints. So if people in the community need help or assistance, we know that, and we can plan to coordinate our work with them. But for that meeting to be effective, we recognize that we have to have a time when people can discuss design elements that are coming into the code or that they want to see in the code. And so we set up an additional meeting, which is this one, to discuss the design components that we have going on. It's not required to participate in this. We're doing it as an extra synchronous event because it's very efficient if you have design questions to do them back and forth live. We will, of course, continue to entertain design discussions on the list or on Skype or any other way that you manage to get a hold of us, including the Etherpad. So these meetings are documented in Etherpad. I'll be taking notes as we go. You are welcome and encouraged to also take notes on the Etherpad links and use them to capture ideas and thoughts about what's going on with this. We will use these as a place to maintain documentation within the sprints. If there aren't any questions, I was going to turn it over. Sorry. Okay. I was going to turn it over to Victor to talk about the changes we've been making in two critical areas. One is multi-OS and the changes that have been coming into the code base around multi-OS, and then the second one is on some of the networking refactor on how we've reconfigured that. So Victor, do you want to start? You want to pick one of the two topics to start, and I'll try and keep up with notes as we go.
Sure. Well, the thing that went into the code base earlier was essentially a complete rewrite of how the network recipe controls networking interfaces that are owned by Crowbar. We used to try to leverage the underlying distro tools to help us manage the interfaces as much as we could. This ran into issues timing issues around when we were writing out the config files versus what interfaces we could take up and take down, and how well we tolerated intermittent loss of connectivity while that whole process was happening. The very short version was that unless everything happened perfectly, you usually wound up with a node that couldn't communicate with anything. And it also made it harder to... Oh,
shoot. Hold on just a moment.
Oh. Did your bridge drop?
Is that better?
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So how much of that do I need to repeat?
Just keep rolling. Basically, we were just talking about some history on the network pieces.
Okay. So,
everything's on the recording.
Okay. So one of the things that I did pretty much immediately after we split out the Fred release of Crowbar was to rewrite the networking stack so that it is no longer dependent on distro-provided tools to manage the interfaces. Specifically, we got rid of using the if up and if down scripts that SUSE, Debian, and Ubuntu, and Red Hat all use, and instead we manage the interfaces directly now. This lets us make sure that this lets us do better sanity checking on what the config we have versus the config we want is, and it allows us to reconfigure the interfaces very early in the Chef client runs, so that we have the potential to roll back if things fail, and so that we can be assured that any of the other recipes that we have to run on a node will all be running with the proper network config. And that actually simplified the network bar clamp code a lot. There's probably still some lingering bugs. I squashed a couple last week involving Ubuntu trying to be too smart about bringing up partially configured bridges and VLAN interfaces. And so I had to switch that, and there are probably still some bugs on how we handle SUSE support because I haven't been able to replicate a build with SUSE yet. From a deployment standpoint, the code should have minimal impact on how Crowbar gets deployed. The main impact is that it's going to be a lot more reliable in reconfiguring how we run our networks on the fly. It'll integrate better whenever we start doing things like managing switches and creating and destroying Crowbar networks on the fly.
So, I mean, you're actually manipulating the network configuration files directly, right? You're not using the command line APIs. Is that the gist of it?
No, I am using instead of using if up and if down, I'm mostly driving the network configuration directly using the IP command, the bridge helpers, and the sysfs stuff for creating and destroying bridges and VLANs. All that works the same way across the distros because all the distro provided tools wind up calling into those tools to do their job.
Okay. Okay.
And I'm writing out, I'm keeping track of what we're doing, and I'm writing out proper distro-specific configs once all the interface changes are made. But that's just as a helper if we have to reboot, so that we'll come up with a proper.
Okay. Would that cross platforms if we supported, say, Windows or something like that, or are there abstractions for that?
If we support Windows, we're going to have to wind up doing a lot of entertaining stuff to make it all work properly, no matter what.
I love entertaining. This involves a lot of.
Yeah. For one thing, I have no idea how to create a bridge on a Windows box. And if we ever want to do something as crazy as run OpenStack on Windows, I don't know why you'd want to do that. We'd have to rework all that stuff.
Okay.
Oh my.
They're working towards it.
But if we port to different operating systems, I don't imagine that their regimes would look much like if up and if down anyways. I doubt that FreeBSD's does. I know that Mac does, and I'm very certain that Windows doesn't. Okay. So those would require their own separate code paths in any case. I just wanted to make it across all the modern Linuxes. I wanted to make that code more reliable because that's what we support right now.
Okay.
Since we're developing all since we are directly manipulating the sysfs files and the IP commands, so you'll be probably delivering all the init scripts, I think, right?
I could only hear about half that. There's a lot of background noise.
Yeah. Do you want to try type your question, Surya?
Sorry, am I audible? Hello?
Yep. We can barely hear you. That's better.
Yeah, okay. Since we are directly manipulating the sysfs files and using commands like IP, so we will be delivering all the init scripts which manipulate the network.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? That's how we're going?
Whenever we do that, we do it in two phases. First, the network recipe is smart enough to look at the current configuration, the actual running config, as opposed to what's in the configuration files, which was another thing that was tripping us up, and manipulate the state of the interfaces to what we want it to be directly using the IP commands and using sysfs. And at a later phase during the Chef client run, we write out a networking config for each of the distros that has the config that we want, so that if the node reboots for whatever reason, it comes up with the right config before Chef Client has a chance to run.
Okay, got it.
That's interesting. So you're using the init files as the source of truth?
No, I'm not. That was getting us into problems earlier.
Oh, okay. So I'm typing it wrong or misunderstanding.
I'm using the live running config as the source of truth.
Right.
That's not the init files.
Okay.
Because, for instance,
How do you get the live running configuration?
I run IP and look at the state of the interfaces, or pull the information I need out of sysfs, and I've abstracted most of that into a helper class called Nick that lives in the deployer bar clamp that knows how to do all of the basic NIC level configuration that we need to do.
So this is a significant rewrite from, I mean...
This is a pretty much complete rewrite to the code that was in Fred. And the primary, the kind of the thing that immediately drove it was I wanted the ability to be able to run Crowbar in a no VLAN environment and still have separate subnets. But most of the while Linux supports binding multiple IPs and arbitrating between them on the same interface, it supports that pretty well these days. Most of the distro-specific tools don't, or they have wildly differing means of doing it.
Right. And
so I decided to make life easier by bypassing most of that. So it's now possible to deploy Crowbar with no VLAN tagging, one Ethernet interface, and do a full OpenStack deploy and have it have all the IPs bound on the on ETH0 and the bridge that come up, and have the right things bound up the right places.
So this is a major code change. It's not in the 1x branches. It's only in the 2x trunk.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we? I have a series of questions to ask, but are there questions from audience that people want to ask before I dive into my question? Okay, interrupt if you do. So with this, what type of testing, what type of things should we be looking for as we go forward? How do we check this code? What do we do to help?
If you run into a situation where you lose network connectivity, yell at me loudly.
Okay.
Right now, we don't have any RAs that call for deploying without using VLANs, so that code path is mostly only tested by me when I'm doing test runs. However, it could be useful for people running on top of VirtualBox or VMware, where the story for doing tagged VLAN traffic over bridges is not always clear exactly how well that's going to work. We can now test Crowbar in a mode that just doesn't use tagged VLANs at all.
Okay.
And all network connectivity
which has been a problem for us, because the VMware stuff is the tagged VLANs would break all the VMware stuff.
Yeah. Okay. And now it's possible to do a full deploy of Crowbar without using tagged VLANs and still have segregation at the subnet layer. So you can still have multiple subnets. They'll wind up bound to the same IP address, but or not the same IP address at the same network interface.
So how does this code help us in the network modeling changes that we've done? How do those two things link together?
I honestly don't know. I haven't been paying as much attention to the network modeling stuff as I should be.
I can answer that if you want.
Oh, hey, Greg. Yes, please do.
That's Greg. So part of the reason for doing this is it moves us towards the belief that Crowbar is the source of truth for these configuration information. Part of the old code spent some of its time interrogating those files, the interfaces file on Ubuntu, to get what it thought was truth, and that caused a lot of conflict. As we redo the networking bar clamp to not only do this part so that it relies on Crowbar and drives it without necessarily doing the changes, the top part allows us to do more database-driven models to say this is the network, this is the truth for that network, and so forth and so on. So the point is, while it wasn't intended to provide that direct kind of control, the fact that it's more model-driven stat side. Victor did a good job of abstracting those as models so that they could be mapped to the models on the other side, where the other side is the actual Crowbar database piece, doing the mark map to do more API-driven CRUD operations on network, opposed to what we had in the past, which is the single monolithic file go kind of operation. All of those kind of things are flowing towards a more dynamic, programmable network.
So the heart of a lot of these changes are to make us able to be more dynamic, able to be more fluid in how network configurations change.
Yeah, that's a pretty big driver of how it all works.
So how do you avoid? Does that mean that you don't have to take the interfaces up and down as much? Is there an aspect to that?
I try to avoid taking interfaces up and down anyways due to inevitable issues with spanning tree that we'll encounter. You can do a surprising amount of configuration changes without actually having to physically take an interface down these days. The only ones that I can really think of that would force an interface to go down is adding and removing it to a bond, which includes changing the mode of a bond, which we can also do on the fly now. And the initial system bring up. Other than that, renumbering IPs shouldn't cause an interface to go offline. Changing a default route shouldn't cause an interface to go offline. You can even enslave to a bridge without taking an interface offline.
So before, the old code used to slam the interfaces up and down quite a bit, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that's because we were relying on the distro tools to do that, and they tend to take more of a big hammer approach with it. The new code kind of takes more of a chef-ish approach in that it only makes the changes that it has to make, and it's pretty smart about how it makes them, as opposed to just removing all your old config and putting new config in place.
That's a significant change, because that means while we're making all these layered late bound, referring to my favorite topic, but these layered late bound changes, as you bring in new applications, it's not, the network changes aren't going to just slam down and change the network under you, right? You're not going to have the networks flickering on and off just because you're adding capabilities into the network descriptions.
Well, that depends on how smart you are about doing it. I mean, it's possible to do something incredibly dumb and still take your network down.
Yeah.
But
it's the only way. It's the only way we can do the things with Crowbar2 where we reassign an entire network segment.
I can do that without taking the interface down. Add the new IPs, wait for the chef client run to finish, and remove the old ones. I can manipulate routes. Well, the routing that's currently in Network Park Map is still a little primitive. It only really knows how to deal with default routes and the special BMC route that we use whenever we want to do NATing support for BMCs.
So Greg, you were along the lines with the modeling. You expect that as these network models come into the environment, that they're going to basically dovetail with the work that Victor has on the actual network implementation.
Yeah, because of our kind of abstraction layers that we're beginning to put in place between the recipes and the part plant model side, right, as part of our Crowbar2 attribute-driven recipe work. The goal is that the models used on the network side that allow for the CRUD operations, dynamic create, all those kind of stuff, should generate attribute-based config that should drive Victor's new recipe so that those are in sync. In fact, I think in some regards it gets easier because Victor's stuff has the idea of intermittent between both sides, but
Inevitable.
already understands in some regards the idea of networks as objects and bridges and VLANs and bonds and all those things made up of these object hierarchies. So probably one of the next steps in this path is, as we get the models defined on the mark map side, we'll need to define a kind of normalized set of attributes that will pass from the mark map side down to the recipe side, so that recipe can become it is today. So the attributes aren't in one place. They're kind of spread out on the node with regards to the network stuff. And so the idea would be to make that into a focused set of attributes that act as a API, if you will, between two apps. That allows us to potentially, if we want to, open source or push back into the community via networking recipes so that they're available to the chef community. And then we can just drive those to the normal attribute set.
All right, so wait, I want you to restate that because it's a really significant point in the CMDB abstraction piece. Could you reverse that comment and talk about it from the chef side?
So one of the big Crowbar2 features that we're trying is convert all of our recipes to be what we call attribute driven. And the idea of this is get rid of the crowbarisms. That's been a big commentary about, well, your recipes, we'd like to use them, but we can't because they're filled with crowbar stuff. So part of what that means is you need a set of recipes that can be driven just by attributes. So normally there's an attributes RP in a recipe, and you fill that in, and then you upload your cookbook, and now you've got your recipe kind of set to be what you need to configure. So with Crowbar, what we plan to do is have the marksman side define a set of attributes that need to be set using our CMDB abstraction. This could be puppet or chef or whatever down the road. Put those into the right place into the CMDB. So for chef, it'll probably be a role that you put all these attributes on. So this is a recipe. Then find those attributes in known locations and apply them in a consistent way without having to know anything that they're being driven by their own attributes.rb file or the Crowbar system of setting stuff up. So the goal of that is to provide recipes up to the community, be open sourced and maintained and enhanced by everyone that aren't necessarily Crowbar specific, but can be used and are distributed from within Crowbar.
Okay, thank you. Right. So if these attributes are generic enough and make sense enough, then while they're helpful in Crowbar, they're actually generic attributes that would allow cookbooks or modules to have networking semantics.
Yeah, I mean,
And that's part of this design discussion is to actually identify that in designing these, we're trying to create generic attributes that are not Crowbar specific.
yeah. And most of what's in the network recipes right now that is pretty Crowbar specific is the notion of how we do our conduit mappings. And part of making that attribute driven and able to be pushed back to the community would be to move that logic somewhere else, so that the attributes that the network recipe operates on have all been parsed down from conduits to actual physical interfaces, and we would wind up only dealing with actual physical interfaces in the network recipe.
Okay. Yeah, except the conduits are
They'll have to be
useful abstraction.
They are a useful abstraction, but right now they're a Crowbar specific useful abstraction.
Right. So
Yeah, and the abstraction would still exist. The point is that code would move appropriately across the line back into the orchestration piece, where you're actually making orchestration decisions about this set of interfaces or this set of interfaces, or am I bonding these two versus these four? All those in general have been viewed. We put them on the node side, but in general, they're orchestration decisions about this set of nodes need to have these kind of interface configures, those kind of nodes need this kind of set. And all of that, the conduit as a map and as an idea still exists and is required. It's just going to move into the orchestration side, and then that's going to build those specific attributes, and then for the CMDB abstraction can push that as inherited attributes that the recipe can a higher order path to figure out what goes where.
Good. Okay, so we're at half an hour in, so I'm happy to continue discussions on this. I think we've provided a lot of background. Sounds like we've identified a design topic in that we need to think about how we design the attributes so that they're generic.
Oh, that's something that we'll have to do across all of the recipes that we've customized.
Right, and that's work that's ongoing right now as we're actually building the models to handle attributes. But we haven't decided what they are what they need to be yet. So I don't think it's necessary to delve into that at this point, although we certainly could if there's interest. So instead, what I would have us do is spend some time talking about the heterogeneous OS changes that are coming, and or potentially some of the UFI pieces. Does that sound good? Anybody have a topic they'd rather discuss? Okay.
Just before we leave the attributes,
Sure.
The networking one, that one's going to be probably the biggest changing area with regard to the attribute-driven recipe stuff, just because the network park map was so designed to be so tightly integrated with Crowbar. So that one's going to have the highest order of change with regard to adding attributes and moving attributes around. The other recipes where we had open source community cookbooks to start from, a lot of those are already attribute driven to begin with. And so because they already had attribute files that covered things, and in a lot of places we just need to make sure we're taking full advantage of those and continuing that. So it's not as the networking one is probably the worst one from what's required to be done, but in general it's not as big a change as we're kind of making it out.
Makes sense. Yeah, there was a thought I had along the lines of some of the coding work that's going on for this and what people should be aware of. I guess we'll talk about that. We'll deal with synchronization issues when we get to Thursday.
Well, it also has to do with in some regards that you're thinking of writing your own park wheel.
Mm-hmm.
What's good cleanliness behavior kind of going forward with park wheel writing and style, which we didn't even talk about too much in the previous path, but now I think it's going to be a bigger thing of if you're wanting to use a community cookbook and use it in your park plan, there are some guidelines that you should follow, and in so doing it'll make maintaining kind of an upstream relationship much easier.
Okay, I'm adding that to the backlog list for next week's topics, for future topics. So one of the things that Victor and I were talking about before this meeting started was, and it's along the lines with this, was changing the API designation in the Crowbar APIs to be 2 instead of 1, which is going to break all the APIs, but potentially might be an accurate reflection of the fact that our APIs are going to be different.
That would allow us to do some normalization to get rid of some of the crazy hacks we had to do with the version 1 API to work around the fact that we couldn't have dots in any of the attributes we passed as part of the URL. Which would allow us to make some of the APIs a little more consistent in how parameters are passed.
Yeah, I'm not opposed. I'm not sure that reason alone is required to bump the rev. I suspect we'll end up doing some other worse things that will cause it to happen. But, I mean, we haven't been enforcing people not to use dots. Just if they started to, they'd have problems. And so, okay. I suspect we'll probably have other things that we'll want to have a new designator with. So,
That's
not bad.
I mean, I'm just in a point where we're going to start messing with all the AJAX calls and CLIs and stuff like that, and it seemed to me that it was worth raising here because this is the time we're supposed to talk about that type of impact, that and during our planning reviews, but to discuss it here that we maybe should just go ahead and switch it to 2.0, take the hit of things breaking. And start putting it back together with the new 2.0 APIs, and not maintain the expectation that the 1.0 stuff is going to work.
Yeah, no, I like it. I think that's a good idea. I think it gives us a good hard weight of saying we're changing this and actually coming up with a reasonable versioning system so that in the future we can enforce and detect and migrate as needed.
Yeah.
Right. So the hope is that with the 2.0 API, we will start not doing this type of legacy, we changed you, type of thing. But we knew with 1.0 that was a risk.
Yeah, and outside of us, outside of the CLI, is there anyone that really uses the AJAX API?
There aren't, but that I'm aware of. However, Essex is going to, our Fred branch is going to have its own life cycle. It's going to start getting more adoption in the field, and we will see people who adopt, and this is actually one of the reasons to do it. We will see people who adopt that API and start using it. So, I'd like them to fail faster if they're built in 1.0, rather than try and hit the API and have the URLs pass, but have the objects and
I think
the
if we're expecting
things.
that to be, I think we're expecting the Fred release to kind of be people actually starting to use the AJAX API, then we might want to look at maintaining some sort of backwards compatibility. I mean, there are some crafty ad hoc places for it, but we might want to actually think about, for 2.0, we're obsolescing the 1.0 API, and if we bump it to 3.0, you can expect it to be done.
So the problem is I just don't know which things to preserve.
Yeah. That's the sort of thing that we'd only really be able to get as feedback from watching people use it.
Right. I don't have a problem of retroactively recreating the APIs. I don't think that's that hard to do. But I'm not sure. And I'm open to feedback. I'm not sure it's worth the investment right now. I'm looking at Simon, who doesn't have enough historical.
Right. API wise, I wouldn't do anything that holds us back at this point. That's my opinion on this. It's nice and everything in terms of.
But we haven't hit the point where we're really stable enough to make the sort of commitment that OpenStack does towards their APIs.
Don't even. Yeah. That would be a great problem to have. Currently, unfortunately, we do not have that problem.
Okay.
And I don't have a problem going back and plumbing back in some 1.0. Actually, this is the reason to switch it to 2.0 is if somebody comes back and says, hey, I was using that API and it has a 1.0 in it, then at least we have a way to go and retrofit it.
Here's your route to the 1.0 API. Yeah. Here's your special hack into the controller just for you.
Although what we could do is we can take the 1.0 routes, which are designated pretty clearly, and channel them all into a, hey, this doesn't work anymore page, and not just 404 them.
Yeah.
I like that.
Get a 500 please upgrade or whatever.
I can certainly do that. Greg, do you have any concerns or objections on that?
No. I think that's actually good to give them good feedback, helpful feedback. We need to be careful because I think part of the allure of Crowbar is the fact that we've always said we have a CLI RESTful API that lets you do everything, even though we don't always follow that philosophy. And so that you can always externally try Crowbar without having to go through the UI interface.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to make sure that at least those functions are there and as a baseline. So that's part of what I'm worried about.
I agree with that.
Raising that as a first order concern. There's places as I've been going through the code of late where it's like, just do the UI, but it'd be really useful to be able to like give a proposal.
Yeah, and I had to do some hacks that I really hated to do, add RESTful API support for the multi-OS stuff that I just added. And I hate them because they're not even compatible with our current API scheme, but there's no real easy way for me to plug in what I needed in the current API.
So, Greg, I am very willing, and I think that that's a great design objective, that we should be pushing on ourselves to make sure that we don't have UI functions that don't have RESTful APIs.
The other thing that I think would be good would be
I think there are things that make sense not to have necessarily API functions, right? I mean, there's certain like function visualization, for example, right? We don't necessarily have to expect that to have a RESTful API. Now, if we can pull a node or whatever and communicate it or or whatever, it's fine. We don't necessarily need a specific view page for it. A lot of times what we miss in some cases is we need to do this action, let's just throw this in. And we miss, right? And that's what I think we need to be better as a just saying, we're heading this as an action, let's also make sure we can press that, right?
Yeah. It also helps us with testing, and so. Yeah, totally. So I think that should be a design priority. I think that we need to make sure we discuss it as we do designs, that we continue to expose these objects and build tests to make sure that the RESTful API is a way to do it.
The other thing I'd like to have is just a general, whenever you're designing an API, we need to have some guidelines as to, you should always expect, this parameter or the next thing in the path, in the URI path to be the host name or whatever. Just lay down some style guides along those lines.
Okay, so there's a pending action. Okay, so this is a style guide for the 2.0 API. I agree with you, to have some consistency.
That way we just have a document that everyone can follow for normalizing whatever they're working on at the time.
Okay, we can look at the 1.0 APIs and that'll help inform what patterns we have.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay, so let's talk about heterogeneous OS a little bit. We'll spend 10 minutes on it. This is it'll be a teaser for next, but I know you've been making some progress on it.
Tease us. Okay. Hey y'all, did you know that once you put the provision in online mode, you can set some magic switches and deploy a mixed OS Crowbar cluster? Well, you can now.
I'm excited.
So I've been
where's that documented? That's pretty cool.
readme.heterogeneous-os-support in the source tree. At the top level of the Crowbar source tree.
Assuming you can spell heterogeneous. Yes,
readme.h, I think. Star will get you the file you're looking for.
In the Crowbar source.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been kind of stealth adding support for heterogeneous OS support in online mode for 9 months now. Just trickling bits of code in as bits and pieces, correct misfixes, making things more generic. And last Friday, when I was at Texas Linux Fest, I went ahead and wrote up the last bits that I needed to tie everything that I had together to allow you to, through the CLI, say, I want this node to be this OS, and the next time it transitions through installing or reinstall, it will pick that OS to install.
Where's that surfaced? And where do you set that?
It's currently set as part of the node role for that. We have we've had a thingy there forever called Crowbar Hardware OS. I didn't see how that was a hardware specific thing, so I just lived it out to Crowbar OS. And now the provisioner, or the deployer, I copied the logic that we currently use to set the RAID and BIOS specific roles, so you could potentially drive it, or drive OS selection for a node that way. I haven't tested it because I really have no idea how. Greg probably has a much better idea than I do about that. And I've also set it so you can drive that directly through the CLI, and I've exposed that as part of the provisioner.
One of the things I was interested in talking about is how those are going to get, how we're going to expose where people choose what OS goes on a thing. It's really a provisioner attribute, isn't it? Like a role in the provisioner? Or... It's
not a role in the provisioner at all. It's just an attribute that's set on a node. It's set on the node's machine-specific role. Right now. And the provisioner and the deployer drive it.
Okay. But it's not like a CMDB attribute, it's a base attribute?
I haven't been working in the code path that involves CMDB.
Right, so now it exists in the non-Rails tree.
Yeah.
As a map that's in parallel to kind of our RAID and BIOS maps that live in that code. And so it looks for a role or code pattern and choose an OS based upon that role pattern. Or, in theory, some variables are there, we just don't necessarily have the UI layer for it to let you specify an OS choice at the node edit page before allocation.
Yeah, we have all the logic in place to allow you to discover what OSs the provisioner can provision.
We do?
Yes.
Okay.
That's part of what I added.
Okay.
Is there's a differentiation between the OSs the provisioner supports and what we actually have available. Right now, the choice is made whenever you flip the provisioner into online mode. Before that, it's whatever the provisioner had installed. After that, it's whatever was able to grab the PXE information that it needed.
Okay.
That'll need to be replaced by some more elegant logic or useful logic once we start supporting things like FreeBSD or ESX or Windows or whatever.
Yeah, that's an interesting. So we need to discover the list of operating systems that are available, or if online mode, you'd be able to pull them in.
I do that already.
Okay.
There's pretty much the setup base images recipe in the provisioner is responsible for discovering all of that.
Okay.
And it's what populates the list of operating systems that are available to be provisioned. And
in the Crowbar 3.0 world or 2.0 world, those become CMDB attributes that we have to populate in so that the provisioner node shows up having those options, and then the rest of the system can pick them up and find them and go about their business, right? Right now they get populated on the wall.
Yeah, and pretty much a lot of what the changes that I've been making to the provisioner over the months, a lot of that's going to have to be reworked for the CMDB world, because there is a lot of stuff that I discover and make available for configuration on the fly, either as part of deploying a proposal or just stuff that's discovered based on what it sees in the directory trees that it manages.
Okay.
So. But right now, I just have very basic support that lets you effectively deploy Ubuntu 12.04 and CentOS 6.2.
Oh, because we have both, right?
Theoretically, it'll work for the older OSs. In practice, they've bit rotted since we started supporting 6.2 and 12.04.
Makes sense.
We could probably unbit rot them, but I don't really see much of a point to it right now.
I don't either. That doesn't...
Yeah, it wouldn't be that hard. I just don't see much.
There's 12.04 is the LTS, so there's very little incentive for us to do anything legacy.
There'd be an incentive for us to do 12.10 probably, but I don't see us really going back into the past for that sort of thing.
In time. Anything future. Oh, 5? We're on 6.2. Why would you want 5X?
Because there are a lot of legacy apps that still use it. The problem with CentOS 5 is we had to go through a lot of insane gyrations to make Chef work properly on CentOS 5.
Oh, right. Right. Ruby's real old and all that.
Yeah, we had to pull Ruby out of a source that was almost reliable, almost as reliable as well, not very. So, there are some hoops that we'd have to jump through to make that work properly. I mean, the source that we're pulling Ruby for CentOS 6 right now is still only at Chef 10.6, and we really need to start getting up to the more current stuff. Chef 10.14 supposedly will have a fair amount of stability fixes, and the ops code trees for Chef has been open for everyone to push in stuff for Chef 11. So we're not keeping up with the times by running off of the Arbel repos for our Chef stuff for Red Hat.
RVM is not an option. RVM is not an option.
No, we have issues with RVM.
Greg can talk all about the issues we have with RVM.
It requires some online operations that have been problematic for us.
So multiple OS support right now is still pretty primitive. I wouldn't rely on it for production use. It's more as a exploratory toy and just enough of a proof of concept for us to really start thinking about what kind of changes we'll need to make and how better to support it in actual running configs.
Right. So, I mean, but we're exposing the attribute issues that we need to resolve and discovery. So currently, we have
It also begins to differentiate the problem, right? The problem of installing whatever OS you want, kind of energy, go ahead. And then the next kind of step is, how do I take that freshly installed energy OS and manage it with Crowbar?
Yeah, and right now we use the exact same paths we always have for doing that. But when we start getting into doing things with like FreeBSD or ESX, we're going to have to develop a better story. We can't just use the exact same provision or code paths. There's going to have to be some abstraction there.
Windows. Pick Windows.
I don't want to think about Windows. Not right now.
You should think Windows.
I know I should.
Yeah.
I just have this mental block.
So what other issues are we going to be facing in the next 2 or 3 sprints around this for design elements? And Greg, I was directing that to you.
Which version?
Actually, this brings up the need to merge the trees together. While I'm tossing in these sort of tactical coding things. Is it time to merge the trees?
And just deal with the fallout.
Possibly. We definitely could merge development into Rails 3 and DB.
Right.
That direction is probably fine, and it's the first step regardless. So
That's what I was thinking.
fine. That's doable. I'm not sure when I want to go Rails 3 and DB back to development. We still can't deploy anything with it, which in theory you can deploy development today.
Right.
So anyway, we're getting closer, but we're still not quite there.
No, well, I think with some of the changes, we're going to move further from deployability on the Rails 3 DB in the next sprint or 2. Right, if we're changing the API, that's going to break. If we're changing the API number, it's going to break a whole bunch of stuff. The models are actually tearing apart all the all the Barclamp provisioning, and then we're going to have to tear apart the node model stuff also. I guess the question is that do we want to just make trunk broken? I guess we don't have to, is your point.
We've been trying to avoid it so far. It doesn't mean it's required or not. We can make that choice. But right now, we've been trying the ones where they aren't broken. But
Okay.
it's a choice that we can choose. I'm not sure. I don't know who it impacts right now. We have the bread trees out there, so in general, we can always say use bread tree.
Yeah, and for people wanting to do stuff, that's going to be stable, I point them at Fred anyways right now.
Yeah.
Because we know that, at some point in the future, no matter what happens, we're going to break your shit with with development when we merge all the Crowbar 2.0 stuff back in. At some point, there's going to be a break.
Yeah. Okay.
And my kind of thought is we may as well get it out of the way.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think that this is, is Greg's call from his position with this, his leadership on that, and so just we'll keep pushing it down. So I guess the answer for that is if you feel strongly about it one way or another, influence Greg.
I'll bring donuts.
Kolaches. No onions. Okay. With that, we are wrapping up the hour. If you have something to add to the notes that are in the Crowbar Sync-In Sprint 0802 page, please feel free to do that. I hope this session is helpful. Certainly is for me, but which is good enough reason to me. And please spread the word and participate. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.